So our next speaker, Yasmin Green, who is our head of strategy and operations for Google Ideas. And her fun fact is that in her spare time, she's taken up filmmaking. It seems to be a common theme today. And she's currently location scouting for and I just want to get it right, for an absurdist and modern technology take on the folktale of Aladdin, which should be pretty cool. I'm pretty excited. And now I have like the blue genie in my head with Robin Williams. So with that, I give you Yasmin.
Hi everyone. Okay, I thought we could actually get started by me showing you a video clip of an event that we arranged in my group Google Ideas called Conflict in a Connected World. So maybe we could dim the lights and show that video.
The internet was designed for and has proven to have an incredibly positive impact on the world. It was designed with an aspirational optimism that remains, but we need to adapt our tool set to the realities of the world.
Today, access to the internet equals freedom of expression, and it should be considered a basic human right. However, the control of the information has always been a priority for the Cuban dictatorship, as most dictatorships.
In 2009, when there were a contested election, Bolletarian became a place where people expressed dissatisfaction with the Iranian government, and in a matter of 4 months, it got blocked.
There have been more than 70,000 URLs blocked in Thailand. When people express opinion about the king of the internet, they can get bullied and they are risky of going to jail for up to 15 years.
Because of their limited access to the internet, Cubans have resorts to offline means like USB flash memories and DVDs to share information. It's important that they know what really goes on in their country, and it's also important that they know what goes on in the world.
Conflict has existed since the dawn of time, but we're just now seeing how closely digital technology is starting to influence the way that different forms of conflict play out. Things that happen offline are impacting how people react and share content online, which in turn impacts offline events.
During the revolution, I covered what was happening in Sidi Bouzid over the internet. I was arrested and tortured in the Interior Ministry for 5 days. I think that social networks and the internet was the most important factor in the Tunisian revolution.
Since January 2013, the Syrian regime launched at least 150 Scud missiles on people. So we built MTAP, which is the online warning system for the people who live in that targeted areas so they can go to the shelter. That service made the Syrian regime angry. After 10 days, we had this massive, huge DDoS attack to throw us offline.
Attacks against the users, the servers, and the infrastructure of the internet are increasing. The reality is that the next generation of internet users is going to experience more turbulence, and we need to figure out how they can be protected.
As technology changes, the law doesn't always catch up quite fast enough. If we want people to have freedom online, we absolutely have to keep fighting for it.
My hope for future generations are very simple: access to the internet, access to information, access to freedom of expression. What they can communicate among themselves, eventually that will lead to freedom.
Cool, thanks. I hope you enjoyed that video. It always inspires me. Slimane Mamou, we saw him on the clip. He talked about being arrested and tortured in Tunisia. He's probably one of the most inspirational people that I've met in the last few years. He's a Tunisian programmer, blogger, and internet activist. And he was arranging street protests for internet freedoms and getting arrested several times before the protests that led to the Jasmine Revolution, where he was arrested and tortured. And after his release, interestingly, 2 days after, in January 2011, he was actually appointed to be Secretary of State for sport and youth for the interim Tunisian government, which sounds magnificent, other than the fact that by May of that same year, he had resigned because of army pressure on the government. Internet censorship had resumed. So Slim is one of many pioneers on the forefront, on the front lines of revolution. But I found him particularly inspirational, and he said something that really stuck with me. I asked him, what advice do you have for other people that are thinking about challenging their governments? And he said, if you aren't tech savvy, you aren't effective because you're not safe. And that's really relevant to what I'd like to talk to you about today. How many people, before they saw the agenda for today's event, had heard of Google Ideas? By show of hands. Okay, maybe a quarter, so that's good. I'm looking forward to telling you more about what we do. The starting premise is that there is a nexus between technology and geopolitics. And world affairs increasingly have a digital and a physical component that come hand in hand. So when we started Google Ideas 3 years ago, it was our intention to bring together users and experts, but also engineers, to see technology initiatives that would help the people that are living through conflict and instability and repression. That's why I'm really excited to be here today, because I assume that every one of us is really passionate about technology and also about geopolitics. The question I have is, how many of us think of them or work on them in tandem? And if the answer isn't everyone, then that's something that I'd love to change. So let's start by taking a look at the problem. This is a map created by Freedom House, who are a US-based NGO. According to Freedom House, 2 out of every 3 people in the world faces some type of repression, either online or offline. And for 1 out of every 3 people, that repression is severe. And without trivializing the devastating impact of censorship and authoritarianism, those things aren't really new. They've been around since the beginning of time. So what is new? The way connected technologies are changing how they manifest themselves. Our beloved internet. It's been around since, well, it's been around since longer than that. It's been changing lives really since the mid-1990s, even though only 16 million people used it then. Since that time, a whopping 2.7 billion people have come online. And they've used a suite of devices, most recently PCs and desktops, mobiles, tablets, wearables, and social platforms have completely exploded. So not many of us would get to 2:15 p.m. in the afternoon without interacting with a social media platform at least once. But social has really ushered in unprecedented usage patterns. On average, every single second, that's every single second, 100 hours of video are uploaded to YouTube. 500,000 tweets are sent on Twitter, and this is whopping. 10 million photos are served on Facebook in a single second. So that's really astounding. And of course, that pace of change is not decelerating. And we're only at the 2.7 billion people online mark. In the next decade, we could be joined by another 5 billion people. And guess what? They're disproportionately coming online in environments where states are weak, rule of law is strained, and the youth are the majority and largely unemployed. So there's a real risk that while repression and conflict persist in the physical world, as the next 5 billion come online, they manifest themselves in entirely new forms on the internet. So at Google, we like to aim big, and we talk about something called a moonshot. Has anyone heard that term moonshot before? Raise your hand if you have, I will ask you. Okay, what do you think a moonshot is?
Oh, you mean in Google?
No, anything.
Oh,
in non-Google.
In non-Google?
Mm-hmm.
Something that is technologically possible but not yet perceived. It's not perceived necessarily how you would get there.
Yeah, exactly. You have a kernel of an idea that makes you think that you can achieve something really outrageous. And you feel excited. Right. That's perfect. So it originated from Project Apollo, which was President JFK proposed a national goal to Congress in 1961 to send a man to the moon and have him return safely. And that was thought to be audacious and actually impossible. And he had proposed for it to be done by the end of the 1960s, and it indeed was done by 1969. So that's kind of where our inspiration when we talk about moonshots. And our moonshot at Google Ideas is this: to end repressive censorship by 2024. So let's take a look at what that looks like in practice. Here's our map. Freedom House, we said, they look at print and internet and broadcast media, and they rank all countries in the world, so all 197 countries, according to press freedoms. And of course, press freedom is an indispensable requirement for democracy. So of all these 197 countries, coming in at 191, so that's 6 from the very bottom, was Iran. I'm Iranian. I was born in Iran, and I have friends and family who are there. And I think that I have a pretty good familiarity with the Iranian digital repression toolkit. So I want to take you through it really fast. The first go-to tactic, actually, for any repressive regime is the blocking of websites. So any site that's thought to be associated with free expression, like Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, those are blocked. Independent media, human rights advocacy, those are also blocked. But a real hallmark of Iranian digital repression is throttling. So deliberately slowing down the internet to make it just so painfully, miserably slow that people just give up trying. And the minister in Iran for communication and technology is actually on record as saying that the Iranian government deliberately slowed down the internet at the time of the last presidential election. So news like the ex-2-term president being disqualified from running, or really anything about the 8 candidates that were approved to run, none of that information could be found for users that were trying to look online. But one of the most alarming tactics the Iranian government uses is something called man in the middle. That's manipulating your information traffic. So anytime that your information is going through hardware or software that's being controlled by a government or corrupt ISP, they can manipulate that traffic. And last year, pro-regime activists in Iran, they created an imitation version of the BBC's website. The aesthetics were identical. Same font, same layout, same everything, but just the odd story was replaced with something that was more like propaganda for the Islamic Republic. So on the BBC's website, or this fake BBC, you could see articles like Death of bin Laden, fabricated by Washington, or BBC colluding with Israel to attack Iran. And users in Iran they'd try to visit bbc.co.uk and automatically get redirected to the fake BBC, and they just wouldn't know. So the motivation was to deceive people, and it really worked. The good news, however, is that there are tools to protect users such as those in Iran, and they're called proxies. By show of hands, how many people here have used a proxy before? Okay, that's incredible, like 90%. Likely to be a lot lower, I think, in a less technical audience. So you know that proxies redirect your connection through a computer that isn't subjected to the same repressive tactics. So you 90% are in very good company, and I'd like to just pause for a second and highlight a bit of an irony here. Some of the most prominent users of proxies in Iran are actually the supreme leader. So this is the most powerful man in Iran, and arguably the entire Shia Muslim world. He uses proxies to add to his photo album online. I follow him. Is that okay? The president, the recently elected president Hassan Rouhani, tweets to his 170,000 Twitter followers, presumably using a proxy because Twitter's blocked in Iran. And this is the biggest social media power user you'll come across, the foreign minister, Javad Zarif, who has 824,000 likes on Facebook. So these are 3 of the most prominent leaders in Iran who actually were not on social media at all a year ago, and are now using proxies sometimes on a daily basis to circumvent the same severe digital repression that they impose on all of their people. That's Yeah, that's 21st century statecraft in Iran for you. So in theory, you have these proxies that allow people to access the internet through a more safe, less blocked, and more private means. But in practice, they face two challenges. The first is scale. So unlike traditional technologies where the more people that use them, the more people that use them, positive network effects, with proxies, the more people that use them, the more likely they are to be detected and shut down. The other challenge is trust. Because they're anonymous, you don't know who's providing you a proxy, and you don't know who's using your server as a proxy. And that's a problem. So it's widely believed that in the Iranian bazaar, the majority of proxies that are on sale are being provided by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. So ostensibly, they say they're going to speed up your internet connection. And then when something politically sensitive happens in the country, they start blocking and throttling and manipulating traffic. So if you're an Iranian, you have to choose. Don't access the World Wide Web, or access it through a proxy that's provided by someone that you don't know. And the surprising thing is that every Iranian I know who uses the internet does so using a proxy that they couldn't possibly have faith in. So at Google Ideas, we spend a lot of time thinking about the challenges faced by people in places like Iran, and also the opportunities that are presented by connected technologies. And an interesting insight occurred. Most of the people that we spoke to who are living in these repressive environments had a friend or a family member that they trust who lives abroad, that they already communicate with, they communicate online with. So let me just check here. How many people, by show of hands, how many people in this room have somebody that they trust that lives in a country that's colored in black, red, or orange? Fantastic. That's practically everybody. Great. So that insight is what is at the heart of a product that we are launching called uProxy. And the insight is, what if we could give every person who lives in a repressive environment the technology, in this case a browser extension, to be able to communicate with somebody who lives outside of their firewall, somebody they already trust, so the disintermediation and trust risks aren't there, and through a means that's really simple. And uProxy it's a browser extension in Chrome and in Firefox, and also we're going to build it for Android. You download it like you would any other extension. You can log into your chat through, let's say, G+ or Facebook. And as long as the person that you trust who's on the other side of the national border has that same extension, you can now exchange not just photos and jokes online, but actually your internet experience, your less restricted access to the internet. And that really is probably in my 8 years at Google, this is the product that I'm the most, I mean, it has personal resonance for me, but the product that I'm the most excited about. But our moonshot has several steps. So what if those users that are trying to access information find that when they get there, that information has been taken offline in the first place? So let me give you a few examples from recent real-world events. Okay, several regimes across the world are being challenged by protests. This is Thailand, this is Ukraine, this is Venezuela. Hundreds of thousands of protesters on the streets, and in many cases, those protests are turning bloody. And the violence is rarely unilateral, and the context for these displays of civil unrest are very complicated indeed. But there's one thing that we believe, which is that every voice in the debate deserves to be heard. And there's an observation there that typically if dissent is being cracked down on in the physical world, it's also being cracked down on in the virtual world. And if freedom of assembly is deemed to be a threat, then surely so is freedom of speech. And in many ways, you can think of a website as being the 21st century equivalent of an office. So in the same way that the physical presence of NGOs and independent media organizations are being shut down, so are their online virtual presence. Another question. How many people here have heard before of a DDoS attack? Wow, okay, it's about 2/3. To put up the hand, can you put up the hand over here? Did you put up the hand? Okay, do you know what a DDoS attack stands for? Okay, behind you, do you know? Oh, everyone's just like, who? Okay, another question. Who here knows what a DDoS attack stands for? Okay.
Denial of service.
Yes, exactly. Denial of service, a distributed denial of service attack, which is basically flooding a website with unwanted traffic so that it can't stay up. And there are very, very many of these DDoS attacks happening. 20,000 plus a day. And DDoS attacks are responsible for 1/3 of all server downtime. And they are most often politically and ideologically motivated. So these are a really big problem. Guess what? You can buy a DDoS attack. And this one I found online. This is actually, I think, even expensive now, because I found this 3 months ago, and I think they're really getting cheaper in price. $100 on eBay to buy a botnet that wages a DDoS attack. So I'm sure you guys know what a botnet is. You kind of infect a network of machines with malware, and then you command and control them like an army of computers. So now we're in this situation where anyone can buy anyone else's silence anywhere in the world by buying a botnet. In particular, at particular risk are small websites, because they don't have the infrastructure or the resources to stay up when faced with a flood of traffic. And this is an example. The Kenyan election monitoring webmasters told us that they had, despite having a website the whole time, they'd never actually managed to stay up during the presidential election itself. We saw the guy talk about Bolatarin, an Iranian website, in the video clip. They are blocked in Iran, but even though they're blocked, they still suffer DDoS attacks every time they write anything that's politically controversial, because those pro-state actors want to make triply sure that nobody in Iran can access that content, even if they use a proxy. So this is a graph of 4 years, so that you can see how prevalent and how these attacks are, and also how they're growing. This is a pretty worrying picture. So other than the people in this room who are impressive in terms of having heard of DDoS attacks before, most people rarely, if ever, hear about them. Why is that? Because they're invisible. The threat's invisible. Actually, the people that we speak to, the NGOs that we speak to, or activists that have suffered DDoS attacks, most often don't even know what's happened to them. Because it's invisible. So they'll go into to the browser and they'll put in their URL, and what do they see? Nothing. You know, they ask their friends and family abroad to visit the site, and they also see nothing. The second problem is that, of course, we each only see just our small corner of the internet. No one really has the big picture to understand just how big the problem is. So that's why I want to share with you. That's why we launched this website. It's called, it's at digitalattackmap.com, and it's based on the premise that you don't need to be a meteorologist to understand a weather map. So we wanted to create a map of digital attacks that anybody could understand, you know, that was intuitive and informative for anyone who wanted to find out more. And this is at digitalattackmap.com, so anyone who wants to visit it can. Or if you want to take photos of it, that's also good. Okay, and let me just kind of talk you through, in case you can't see the legend, how this works. The lines, the shape of the lines denote how much information we know about the attack. So if we know the origin and the destination, you see an arched line. If we know just the origin or the destination, you see a vertical line going into or coming out of the country. And if you see a concentric circle, that means that the attack was internal. So the origin and the destination were in the same country. And then you can also kind of color the map by different variables: type, duration, the source port origin of the attack, or the destination port where the attack is targeted. And the data, I'm going to play for you something pretty. This is just a day-by-day of all the attacks that we've seen over the last few months. The data was provided by a group called Arbor Networks, who install DDoS mitigation hardware at over 80% of ISPs around the world. And those ISPs then feed back to Arbor anonymized data on the attacks that they've received, and that's what's kind of driving this map. But I did want to show you actually a few interesting moments specifically. So we spoke before about the protest, the real-world protest that we've seen over the last few months. If you scroll down here to the timeline, this is Thailand that we're looking at. And this is the timeline of DDoS attacks. And this is December 4th. And you'll notice, of course, that December was when the the kind of controversial anti-government protests first started. And you can see that there's, as is often the case, but not always recognized, there's a cyber spillover to what we're seeing happen in the real physical world. Let me show you another interesting case study. This is now China on August 27th. And you'll see like a huge flood of both volumetric and connection-based attacks that are landing in China. If you scroll down, the news results are updated to reflect the country, hopefully relevant to DDoS attacks, and they're relevant for that particular day. So if we click on a result, we can see that indeed China was attacked. The attack targeted China's domain name servers, so all the .cn websites, and this attack actually took out a huge chunk of the Chinese internet. So it was pretty monumental. And the last one, this is October 2nd, and we're looking at the Philippines. So this massive spike in attacks against the Philippine government actually was allegedly waged by the hacker group Anonymous in retaliation for the Philippine government passing a bill that was interpreted to be against free expression online. So we see many types of attacks happen for many types of reasons. We said governments against independent media sites. Actually, quite prevalent are kids against their online gaming rivals. And of course, actually, one of the biggest attacks that is ever recorded on history happened in March of last year, which was 300 gigabits per second, which is the same as the entire bandwidth, international bandwidth of Spain. And when they found the person that did it, it was a 16-year-old boy in the UK who had basically been playing online games in his parents' basement and had committed this. So we get the idea, okay? One thing's really clear, that we have something of a DDoS issue on our hands. And that takes us to the next problem, the problem of protection. DDoS attacks can be used by anyone to silence anyone else, which hurts the internet and it hampers free expression. And mapping it is a really good first step, but if you're being attacked, that just simply doesn't cut it. And Google, of course, we have some of the world's leading experts in DDoS mitigation capabilities, and we also have a core value to protect free expression. So we decided to connect those dots. I'm excited to tell you about Project Shield. Last year, we announced the launch of a new project, a new initiative that provides access to Google's enormous infrastructure to the websites that are most vulnerable and need it the most. And it works by connecting Google's DDoS mitigation capabilities to a reverse proxy. So those most vulnerable sites can use Google's defenses as their first line of defense against malicious traffic while still keeping their own site and data locally on their own servers. The objective was to kind of put our products where our values are and keep the keep support free speech and keep websites up and running. And we're looking for more. So we had some really encouraging results so far. The Kenya election monitoring site that I mentioned, we kept them up during the last presidential election. We've helped websites in Iran, Ukraine, Venezuela, and we want to help more. So in case you yourself run a website that kind of qualifies as being independent media, human rights advocacy, or election monitoring, or you know anyone that does, then please visit the link that's being projected here, projectshield.withgoogle.com, and apply to be protected by us. It's free. Okay, so thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And I guess I'll just leave you with a question, which is, do you care about moonshots, and do you want to help the next 5 billion that are coming online in conflict and repression? And do you kind of get a kick out of working alongside people like Slim Amamu, who's a personal hero of mine? If you do, then the invitation is here to join forces. Thanks. I don't think I have time to do Q&A, but if somebody tells me I do, I will. We can take 2 questions. Okay. Anyone have any questions?
I have a question.
Hi.
Hi, nice talk, thank you. I work for Ushahidi, actually, and Internews Kenya, so we do a lot of crisis mapping.
Oh.
But, and if anyone, we're looking for developers, so if anyone wants to develop for crisis mapping, we're totally into it. But I have a question about your relationship with Tor. I know like in similar proxy services that kind of are more focused on creating anonymity networks, but also based on trust, and New Proxy seems to create more of like an intimacy network. So I'm curious about that relationship.
Yeah, that's a good question. Does everyone here know who Tor are? Have you heard of Tor as a less people familiar with Tor? Okay, so Tor are one of the most widely used proxies out there. And honestly, they are a group that Google has supported in the past, and are the group that are developing uProxy are kind of in close communication with them. So the critical difference, and one that I think is really important, is that Tor is anonymous. So you don't necessarily know when you're participating in the Tor network whether, who it is that's using your computer. I mean, you can just imagine the types of concerns you might have about why somebody might want to navigate anonymously through the internet. And the difference with uProxy is that, that it's just based on this peer-to-peer trust network. Having said that, you could imagine some really cool spin-offs where you could kind of make them interoperable. So the cool thing about this tool is that it works through just your, just through a browser extension in your GChat window or your, Facebook chat window. So I think ideally we would really want to integrate with them going forward.
Thank you.
Thanks for your question.
First of all, I can't tell you enough how excited I am to hear this.
Nice.
I was born and raised in China for 25 years. I stayed there for 25 years. I had been personally identified and threatened for related, just posting free information on the internet when I was still in China. So this is very exciting. But my question is, it's different. So in the map, you show the United States, and it's in the color of yellow. So I want to know if we are indeed, as Americans, our own target of rescue to any extent at all. Could you elaborate at least on the coloring, the scheme of that?
Yeah, so I mean, I showed it 3 times. I guess I don't need to show you that map anymore. But the map was, I'm so grateful that there are organizations that publish these reports so that I don't personally have to subjectively say where is free and where is not free. But yeah, in that map, so Freedom House, a very well-respected NGO that published reports on press freedoms and other freedoms. And in that map, the USA was not white, which was the absolute best. There were 5 categories. The USA was yellow. So is your question, do I personally think if the USA should have been white?
No.
Okay.
It's,
That's...
do we have areas, I guess, to improve towarding, being white, I guess? More free.
Yeah.
Can we free ourselves, or we have work to do?
I actually don't know that question. I'm gonna look at specifically, I think Freedom House actually give their rationale. They have like country-specific reports, and I should have been prepared with that. So I will I'll go and look at why specifically they say the USA isn't white.
Thanks.
Good question. Thank you. Thanks for. Okay, yeah, I know I'm.
Sorry, guys, we're just.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Get in touch. Thanks.